Since Army of the Dead came out on Netflix yesterday, I decided to watch every Zack Snyder film in preparance. Yes, that even includes his short films and documentary. And through my journey with Zack Snyder, I have discovered that I either really love or really hate his content. There is no in between with him. So in this week's video, I will essentially be doing three things in one: ranking, reviewing, and analyzing each one of the films made by Zack Snyder. I will go over each one in order from the ones I like the least to the ones I like the most. I'll also be giving my honest opinions about what I thought about each and analyzing where I felt the movie could have improved. Each film, besides number one, will represent a major problem I find with his filmmaking style. Please keep in mind that I really respect Zack Snyder as a filmmaker. I think he's a genuinely really good guy, but also I don't know much about him besides his art style. Still, I don't mean any disrespect towards him, and if I wasn't a fan of his work, then I wouldn't have watched all of these films and made this video. And also, heads up, I haven't watched Army of the Dead yet by the time I'm making this video, which was like a week ago, so Army of the Dead won't be on this list. I put these first because I don't really have too many opinions about them, and it would be easier just to lump them all together. They're all really good in their own ways. I just wanted to start out mentioning these to get them over with. I'm not a sports fan, but this was an interesting take on Michael Jordan's upbringing. Very inspiring, but honestly, I did not pay too much attention to it. When I found out that Zack Snyder directed this, I was shocked, to be honest, because it just seemed so random for him. And the musical number at the end was certainly interesting. This was basically a documentary short film on the history of Superman and his different art styles and interpretations, and I thought it was really good. I don't know what this was necessarily for, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. It was really fascinating to me to see the evolution of the character throughout decades of different works, and I was not disappointed at all. This short film was Zack Snyder prime, with it being heavily stylistic and very on the surface, yet still very meaningful. The action was really good, and for it being a silent film, the story was pretty easy to follow. This is honestly one of the best works Zack Snyder has produced in my opinion. Also, I don't know why Apple doesn't use this as a shot on iPhone commercial, because it was that good. Now moving on to the feature-length films, I'm going to be completely honest and say 300 is my least favorite film by Zack Snyder, though I do understand why it is some of his fans' favorite. Some things just aren't for me, and this was unfortunately one of them. 300 is about the battle between the United Greek city-states against the Persians, I think. I mean, I love history, but I was just a little confused with what was necessarily supposed to be going on in this movie. This is one of Zack Snyder's most stylistic films, and I understand why some people might like his style, but it just really isn't one for me. I felt like a lot of his movies, especially 300, were just really too dark and made it really hard to see, which shouldn't be too much of a problem, but it was really bothering me throughout the film, and it made it hard to keep focus. I also do not like how the movie looks very much like a video game, but a lot of his movies are like that. Especially the scene where he is battling the wolf, it looks very much like video game graphics, which irked me. I heard that most, if not all of this movie was shot on a soundstage with green screen, which is very upsetting to me because I really think it could have benefited from more practical sets and scenery to help remove that feeling of it being similar to video game graphics. I'm not dissing on video game graphics, there's just a specific art style that video games are limited to because they must leave room for interactability. Being that this is a movie, however, the graphics could have been way better solidified. But as a result of having such a strong artistic style to the film, I felt like this majorly affected the story. There was not enough substance to the story to get me to really care, in my opinion. This has a lot of the same problems as 300, where it is very stylistic, which then causes a detriment to the plot. But this time the art style was great. Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole has a plot where owls are becoming mobilized in an army, I think. Honestly, I cannot tell you anything about the plot because I don't remember what happened, and I watched this yesterday. But yeah, that's a sure sign that the plot is really just not there. But at least the animation was really pretty to look at. I have a huge fear of animals, as I had mentioned before when talking about my octopus teacher, so this wasn't really a fun experience for me because the owls looked terrifying. But I can overlook my fear and still appreciate the advanced 3D animation that went into making this come to life. Also, when I realized that the songs playing throughout the movie and during the credits were by Owl City, I never hated anything more. I love Owl City. I was a fan of Fireflies before it became a meme, but the Owl City music was so on the nose and so campy that it had become something that I love to hate about this movie. Man of Steel is another origin movie for Superman, so pretty self-explanatory. He escapes from Krypton as a baby, grows up with superpowers, kinda similar to Hercules, and then he has to fight General Zod. My main problem with this movie is Superman himself. Henry Cavill plays a really good Superman, don't get me wrong, but I just don't like Superman as a character. I kinda think Henry Cavill plays a better Clark Kent than Superman because that's when he feels the most human. I don't like the stiffness that every Superman interpretation has. In my opinion, I've always viewed Superman as hard to relate to. The guy is so powerful, he's supposed to be the symbol of perfection, which makes him very unlikable. Man of Steel only reinforced that opinion of Superman in my head, where he was so perfect that it became boring. The interesting thing about superheroes is where they are flawed or what they lack. By making a hero that is capable of doing anything, it becomes hard to sympathize and relate to the character. This is why Batman seems to be a way more popular character than Superman. This isn't the fault of Henry Cavill, this is just a fault on the character as a whole. I want to see Superman struggle. This argument though is not just on Superman, there's even some Marvel characters that suffer from the same view of being too perfect to have any flaws, such as Vision or Captain Marvel. Perfection isn't really interesting from a storyline perspective. Ooh, I hated this one so much, what are you gonna do about it? Snydercut is just another version of the original Justice League, but it's the way Zack Snyder originally intended it to be without any interference by Joss Whedon, or so I think. This version has such a massive fan base, and I'm very hesitant to say anything bad about it, but I'm allowed to have my own opinions, I think, so I'll just say it. I didn't like Snydercut. It's just too long. A 4-hour runtime is just too much to expect for casual audiences. I swear, I watched it twice so I could really give it a chance and pay as much attention to it as possible, but I just could not pay attention to all 4 hours. There's so much of the 4 hours that could have been skipped over, like the scene of those girls singing while Aquaman walks into the water at the beginning. There's so many pointless scenes throughout the movie that do not need to be in there, especially since Warner Brothers is not going to move forward with this storyline anymore. I'm not going to mention any real spoilers here, just in case anyone still hasn't watched it, but all of the cameo scenes by that special comic book character that I had no clue who he was were so unnecessary. That's honestly a major fault about the film. Being that I am not a fan of the comic books or the original character storylines, there would be so many moments that seem like references or nods to the original source material that I just did not understand. As a casual fan, I felt very disconnected from what was happening and I was unable to appreciate it as much as other people did. I also did not like the visuals of the movie. Again, it had that major video game look and the 4:3 aspect ratio was not working in its favor. It was too dark like the other Zack Snyder films and became really hard to see. I'm not surprised to hear that there is a completely black and white version of this version, but at least all the scenes with the Amazons are cool. As the title says, Batman v Superman is all about a fight between Batman and Superman, and Jesse Eisenberg Lex Luthor is there as well. Also, as a heads up, I watched the Ultimate Edition, so no one can tell me that I missed something. The first hour of this movie is so good. Like, Zack Snyder really showed off his outstanding potential right there because it was so entertaining to watch. And then all of a sudden, the last 2 hours turned to be a step in the completely wrong direction. I think it all started when Batman was having that dream sequence, and then the Flash randomly shows up. Like, I just lost all interest from then on. And the constant aspect ratio changes just kept bothering me. This came out the same year that Captain America Civil War came out, and if that movie taught us anything, it is that in order to have superheroes fight one another, we, the audience, need to be able to sympathize with both sides. The movie was definitely so pro-Batman and anti-Superman that it became even harder for me to actually like the Superman character in other movies. And then Jesse Eisenberg Lex Luthor was not it. It played a lot more like Joker than Lex Luthor, and that made the character a lot more confusing. Lex Luthor had so much more potential. I basically gave you the plot for this movie when I talked about Snydercut, but this time it's 2 hours shorter, which is a big positive in my opinion. I felt like this version was a lot better paced and maximized its time a lot better than Snydercut, which is always a benefit. But then this also means that too much happened in such a smaller amount of time. I don't remember if I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to try to focus on Zack Snyder's directing style than general problems about the DCEU, but sometimes the two do overlap with one another. But yeah, DC rushed into making this movie in order to catch up with the MCU and the Avengers. As a result, they had to really introduce half of their main cast within this movie, which made it incredibly hard to connect with all of them. Snydercut did try to fix this by giving them each proper introductions, kinda, but that made that too long. So this movie could have really benefited from having several movies come out before it to really let us, the audience, get a chance to learn more about these characters we should care about. And this really isn't a spoiler since he is on all of the promotional material, but the Superman death at the end of Batman v Superman ended up not mattering at all. I know Marvel does this too all the time by killing their characters and then them coming back to life later on, but at least they try to keep it discreet. It was so obvious that Superman was coming back to life, and so there was no point in killing him off in the first place. Finally, a Zack Snyder movie I can get behind. I love this film so much, but keep in mind I have not watched the original that it is based off of, so that might cause my opinion to be different from yours. Dawn of the Dead follows a group of strangers trapped inside a mall during the zombie apocalypse as they attempt to escape death. I believe this is Zack Snyder's directorial debut on a feature film, and honestly, he killed it. But I also do think James Gunn's writing also did benefit the movie a lot as well. Honestly, I don't really have any complaints about the movie because it was just so good. This is what I mean when I say I either love or hate Zack Snyder films. All of the ones I previously mentioned, I could talk about how much I do not like them for hours, but these last three are virtually perfect in my mind. But if there was any reason to put it in third place on my list is because sometimes Zack Snyder likes to go for shock factor in every single one of his scenes. Like every 5 minutes needs to have a major event happen and it feels like a non-stop hype fest. I didn't mind it, but some of those big events were a little too much sometimes, like the baby zombie birth, but that was still very funny. This is the film where Zack Snyder has reached peak stylism and he has every right to do so. Set in the 1980s, Watchmen is about the government attack on all masked superheroes as they try to track them down and place them under arrest. Suddenly, the undercover heroes are being murdered one by one and those who remain must work together to solve who is behind this. Another really perfect movie by Zack Snyder, and it's really hard for me to believe that this is the same director who also made Owls of Ga'Hoole. Every character is so distinct from one another and have their own motivations, which causes me to care for each one of them. It is also just so visually appealing, and this is where a darker and gritty aesthetic really works. This is one of the most timeless films I have ever seen, especially how the social issues they cover throughout the film are still very much present today. It takes place in the 80s, it was released in 2009, and yet the themes and messages are still very much relevant today in 2021. The only mistake on this film is the third act. It's a little too long for my liking, but that's always the case with Zack Snyder films. And it just becomes a little confusing in the end, but the movie is still so great overall. This movie is so flawed it's perfect. I swear it feels like a fever dream. Sucker Punch follows Baby Doll as she is wrongfully placed inside an insane asylum run by Oscar Isaac. Inside, she must dance to access other realities, and along the way, she teams up with the other girls in the institution in order to escape. Saying that out loud, this movie doesn't make sense at all, but it makes perfect sense, I swear. The flaws that I have compiled from the previous films I mentioned are all combined into a giant asteroid and thrown onto this film, but they're all evenly dispersed around that this movie becomes perfection. It is so dark and gritty, like traditional Zack Snyder aesthetic, but not enough to the point where it becomes annoying. It very much looks like a video game for the majority of the movie, but that adds to its fantastical aspects about it and does not really hurt the plot at all. There really is no boring parts to this movie, and there are actual consequences and stakes in place that leave me on the edge of my seat throughout the film. The pacing is great, and Zack Snyder does not waste any time with boring plot points. Snyder is also a master at directing action sequences, and he really does not disappoint with this movie. And the exploration into different genres for each universe they enter into makes it seem exciting and unique every single time they fight. That really does make the movie timeless. So yeah, when I say I either really love or really hate Zack Snyder films, I really mean it. There is no in between, but I have a really strong feeling that Army of the Dead will join the camp of Zack Snyder films that I love, because it already looks so good, and just from the trailers alone. The cast already sounds amazing, and I just cannot wait for it to arrive on Netflix, and hopefully this is a step in the right direction for Zack Snyder. I think he is such a unique and creative filmmaker, and he has so much potential to really make some really iconic work. Maybe the problems I mentioned in some of his films were really Warner Brothers being too controlling, but I never know. He's very hit or miss, but when he's good, he's really good. I have so much respect for Zack Snyder, and I hope that he will soon experience a renaissance of fantastic films, and I honestly am rooting for him no matter how much I didn't like Snydercut.